Hello, and welcome to this lecture on nominal and real interest rates. I hope you're doing well from wherever it is you're joining us. In this class, we will discuss nominal interest rates and real interest rates. We will examine the Fisher equation. This equation links the inflation rate with these two interest rates. Last, we will look at Treasury inflation protected securities, or TIPS, as a case study. TIPS are one of the few securities paying a real interest rate. What is the difference between a nominal rate of return and a real return on an investment? We can understand these concepts with an example. Suppose you have $100 in a bank account. Let's assume that this account pays 10% interest annually. After 1 year, you gain $10 and you have a total of $110 in your account. This $10 that the bank gives you is the nominal return on your $100 investment. This 10% interest rate is also called the nominal interest rate. How much is this profit worth in terms of real goods you can purchase and consume over the year? This is what we mean by a real return on an investment. Consider the following example. This year, you can buy gas for your car at $4 per gallon. So today, your $100 is worth 25 gallons of gas. Now assume that inflation, the pace at which prices increase throughout the economy, is 5%. Gas prices increase by 5%. So next year the price of gas is $4.20. And purchasing the same 25 gallons of gas will cost you $105. So what is the return on our investment? Well, the nominal return is $10. The bank still gives you $10 for your savings. However, gas prices have gone up. This means that after buying your 25 gallons of gas, you have $5 left over. The real return, which accounts for inflation, is therefore $5. The nominal return of $10 minus the price inflation of $5 gives you a $5 real return. This example shows that nominal and real interest rates are linked by inflation. In general, the real interest rate approximately equals the nominal interest rate minus inflation. This is often written with the nominal interest rate I is roughly equal to the real interest rate R plus inflation pi. This is called the Fisher equation. It is named after the American economist Irving Fisher. Let's look at a specific case study. Treasury inflation protected securities, or TIPS. This is a bond investment that takes inflation explicitly into account. How does this work? With TIPS, the principal value of the bond increases with the inflation rate. Since the interest paid on a bond is a percentage of the principal value, the interest paid on TIPS increases with inflation. So the interest rate on TIPS is a real interest rate. Let's look at a specific example. Suppose you buy a TIPS bond that pays 5% interest per $100 of bond. This $100 is the principal value of the bond. Let's say inflation runs at 2% this year. Next year, the principal of the TIPS bond will increase by 2% to 102. So you bought $100 of bond, then this would increase to 102. What is the return on the bond over the year? The total nominal return is the 5% interest plus 2% principal appreciation, so 7% in total. What about the real return? Remember the Fisher equation? The real return equals the nominal return minus inflation. Well, the 2% principal appreciation offsets the 2% inflation, so the real return is 5%. TIPS are designed to give a constant real return. Why do economists pay close attention to the market for TIPS? When we make investments today, we do not know what future inflation will be. As we have seen, inflation matters for real returns. It turns out that we can use the price of TIPS bonds to recover the market's expectations of future inflation. How does this work? Remember, TIPS provide a constant real return. They provide inflation protection. If expected inflation is high, then inflation protection is worth a lot. Since TIPS bonds provide inflation protection, the current market price of TIPS will go up. Higher prices mean lower yields on TIPS. On the other hand, if inflation is expected to be low, then inflation protection is less valuable. In this case, the price of TIPS bonds fall and the yield on TIPS bonds goes up. Thus, TIPS prices or yields capture inflation expectations. In fact, we can compare yields on TIPS versus regular treasury bonds to measure expected future inflation. Let's take a look at some recent data. Here is the yield on the 5-year TIPS bond over time versus the 5-year treasury note. At times, there's a difference in yields between the two. A larger difference in yields means investors are willing to pay for inflation protection. This means that investors expect high future inflation here 5 years into the future. As you can see, yields on TIPS were elevated in 2009. Investors expected higher inflation at this time. The opposite was true in early 2013 as well as in 2021. Investors expected low future inflation. Of course, the market might turn out to be wrong in the end, but this was the expectation embedded in TIPS prices. What have we learned in this lesson? First, nominal interest rates do not account for changes in the price of goods. Second, the nominal interest rate is equal to the real interest rate plus inflation. This is the Fisher equation. Third, TIPS bonds capture inflation expectations.